Hey everyone, if you love true crime mysteries and the darker side of human nature, then like this video and subscribe. Thank you and enjoy. His name was Sean and I met him on Tinder. I won't say it was love at first sight. It took a bit of cajoling from him to get me to agree to a date. He wasn't really my type, kind of looked like he loved himself a tall and buff guy. I'm usually into slightly pudgier guys who, well, I'm sure you don't care about that, but trust me fellas, women who like normal guys are out there, and Sean won me over with a sense of humor, his smooth talking, and his absolute geekery. I'm a big Marvel fan, or well, I was back then anyway, and I went to all the movies in the theater on opening weekend whenever possible. I was also really big into horror, especially the Conjuring universe, so Sean eventually won me over by inviting me to go with him to see The Nun. Hey, the movies are a pretty easy place for a first date. If it's going badly, you can just sort of shift away in your seat and ignore the other person for the duration of the film. He picked me up at a nearby Starbucks. Don't give random Tinder dates your address, people, and we drove to the theater, and honestly, he was great, really charming, fun, and generally a good time. He knew his movies to a nerd in a sort of cute way, which is basically just to say that he's a nerd. Now, the one problem was he was fairly pessimistic about the prospects for The Nun. I'll give him this. He ended up being right, and man, that movie sucked, and let's not even mention the sequel, but this isn't about that. Sean was certain that the first movie was going to suck, even though we were going on opening night, and he was promising me that he had something in mind that would make the experience way more memorable, quote unquote. Well, here we go. I was thinking he's going to make sure that we get seats in the back row, and I'm going to be in for an evening of dodging make-out attempts and groping hands. Still, I wasn't too dissuaded by the former, at least if only that's what Sean had planned, though we grabbed our tickets and some popcorn and even a hot dog. Sean was against the idea of buying a drink, though, according to him, needing to leave the theater to use the bathroom ruined any movie. I mean, I guess I could. By that, I did miss a key scene in The Dark Knight thanks to a bathroom break, but it is a bit psychotic with salty popcorn, and sure enough, when he led us into the theater, he headed straight for the back row. We'd arrived very early for the showing, and it was one of those small-town theaters where you just kind of chose whatever seats were available. He led us down the aisle of the back row until we were basically in the middle. Looking down at the screen, it was a prime spot, in fairness, and I was fine with the seating arrangement. We sat there making small talk, laughing at the ads, and then watching the trailers quietly like good moviegoers should. Then the lights dimmed. Sean finished his hot dog, and he positioned the popcorn between us, and our hands brushed a couple of times as we shared the salted goodness, and I even felt a bit of a spark there. The movie started off not too bad. I was kind of enjoying it, honestly. Taissa Fariga can win me over it very easily, but Sean, however, was not enjoying it. He kept nudging me, making whispered comments about how crappy it was and how it could use some extra scares. I mostly just ignored him because honestly I was enjoying it and I wasn't going to pretend otherwise. And then he told me to look down. At the same time, I felt something prodding into my side. Sean was sitting on my left, and other than an elderly couple at the end of the row on the right, we had the whole line to ourselves. I looked down. Sean was holding the biggest hunting knife I had ever seen, and the tip of it was very slightly pressed into my side. I remember his words like it was yesterday. Move or call for help or do anything and the blade goes in. He said, just keep watching the movie. And so we did, and throughout he kept making goofy remarks and joking comments as if he didn't have a huge knife held against me, and I was absolutely trembling, terrified, and speechless with fear. Almost at times I had to stifle back sobs as I replied to his inane jibes at the movie. At this point I had no idea if he'd lose his mind in anger if I disagreed with him, calling the movie garbage or something. I mean, it kind of was, and it got worse as it went on, but obviously I didn't really care at that point, and at that point I was just begging for it to be over. Scenarios were running through my head. What would happen when the credits rolled? Would he expect us to just walk out like nothing had happened? Would I be getting a blade to the gut? I understood now why he'd forbidden us from getting a soda. Not only could it have required me to get up, but it would have improved the chances of me actually pissing myself in fear. I genuinely cannot express to you the terror of sitting there for 90 minutes with a blade gently pushing into the soft flesh of my stomach. I wanted to do something. I knew if I called out for help, he'd be able to gut me before I could receive so much as a look of concern from fellow moviegoers. And then, thank God, the movie was over. We sat there for a moment, and the credits were rolling, and the knife was still pressing into me. The theater lights went up, and That's when I saw it. It was a literal prop knife. Now before you think I'm some idiot, it was a professional level movie prop. I'll be honest, he must have paid top dollar for it, and I could only tell because in the light I could see the official Rob Zombie's Halloween movie branding on the handle. I guess it explained how he held it steady enough that it felt like it could penetrate me at any moment, but never did. And Sean was grinning at me like he'd just given me the world's best treat. There, didn't I make a terrible movie a hell of a lot scarier? He said when he saw the absolute murderous rage on my face. I could tell he was genuinely surprised. This idiot jackass had genuinely believed that just because I was a horror fan I'd be delighted and grateful at him causing me one of the worst hours of my entire life. I can't remember exactly what I said, but I know it was far too obscene to share on this channel, and I also know it resulted in me throwing the rest of the popcorn straight in a smug idiot face, and most of it was still untouched due to me fearing for my life. I stormed straight out of that movie theater, told the manager, who was a friend of mine and obviously was advised to call the cops. There was barely a charge in response, something to do with causing undue stress, but due to the stupid way the laws worked at the time, the low lighting didn't make the charge worse, and the fact that it was an obvious toy made it harder to push for anything more serious. I did make sure to press charges, but he ended up getting off with some slap on the wrist. Thankfully, a very sympathetic judge granted me a restraining order. Not that I think I had any danger of hearing from Sean again, and in his eyes I was the crazy hysterical woman who couldn't handle being an actual horror fan, all because I wasn't cool with having to spend the duration of that movie thinking that I was gonna get stabbed to death. And so, Sean, screw you. I hope the possessed doll of Annabelle eats you in your sleep. Story 2. So it was a busy show, and the movie was The Silence of the Lambs. I didn't know much about it, and I hadn't read the book. All I knew was that my buddy had told me that it was gnarly, and that we had to go, and then when the time came he canceled on me an hour before the movie started, and I just decided to go by myself. There wasn't an empty seat in the house though. The commercials had started as I made my way down the aisle and squeezed along the row to my seat. A few mutters and mumbles from the moviegoers I squished past, and then I finally just jumped into my seat. Now the guy next to me was wearing a very thick old coat and what I actually recognized to be a trib. Even though it was spring and the theater was fairly stuffy, I apologized for bumping into him, and I thought that I heard some sort of grunt or belch or whatever gross, and so I just sat there, and my God, the guy's body odor was not pleasant. I took a deep inhale of my popcorn and hoped that that would help, and by the time the movie started it got easier to just ignore the guy. Now Silence of the Lambs starts off as a very tense movie and only gets more tense from there. Occasionally I felt my theater neighbor's shoulder brush against mine and kind of nudge him back over to the left. I couldn't hear any snoring, but I was sure that I could feel the occasional vibration of a snore at least, and in the end, as the movie got more and more terrifying and gripping, the act of nudging the guy off my shoulder became kind of instinct. I ate my popcorn and nachos, finished my soda, and I somehow made it through the whole movie without needing to get up and use the bathroom, which was great because imagine how many people would have made angry in the crowded theater. And that's why when the movie ended and I was stuck there in the middle of the center aisle surrounded on all sides by crowds, I decided to just wait it out. I watched all the credits until the light started to go up and it looked like I had a clear path to the right from which I could actually exit. That's when I noticed something. The guy next to me was still there. I didn't want to just leave him there asleep, and it would kind of suck if he missed the entire movie too, so I gave him on the tap of the shoulder saying, "Hey buddy, you okay?" Now I'm sure you Let's Read listeners have worked out the twist here as I gently nudged his shoulder. The man, or should I say his body, slumped over to the left and his hat fell off. In the rising lights of the theater I could see it now. This dude was dead. Absolutely stone cold dead. I don't mean he dropped dead in the last 10 minutes either. I mean I'd clearly been sitting next to a corpse for the entire showing of that movie, so how did he make a sound? Why was I sure that I could hear and feel him? Now cops kind of explained this to me later, and when I first nudged him I'd likely just caused some gas to escape his body, and during the point of decomposition he was at, the body starts to bloat with gas, which could have caused the vibration and the occasional feeling of him moving. I never did get to find out exactly what happened to the guy. They were able to tell me enough that the cause of death wasn't suspicious, so I just kind of replied with natural causes, and the cop looks a bit weird and says that he can't really say anymore, and for a while that kind of bothered me. How How can you die in a non-suspicious manner but not of natural causes? And that kind of stuck with me. This old guy had gone to that theater alone, likely taken some kind of overdose and allowed himself to just sort of drift off peacefully in his sleep. What he took I don't know, because fatal overdoses are usually messy, painful, and ugly, but clearly he got hold of something that let him die peacefully. During the previous showing of The Silence of the Lambs, it always bothered me how he wasn't discovered by a theater employee in between the showings. He'd possibly been sitting there for 3 showings of that damn movie and nobody noticed but me. I mean, it wasn't the cleanest theater, but good God, did they not even check the screens between showings? And the final thing that bothers me is, why did he choose The Silence of the Lambs as the final thing he ever saw? It's not exactly a nice movie to just sort of slip away to. Maybe it was the only movie showing that was relatively empty when he got there, which would have been that afternoon. I guess maybe there was something in the film he related to, or maybe he was simply haunted by his own lambs that he needed to silence. Story 3. This happened many years ago now. It must have been 1997, because I was at a showing of Scream with my then girlfriend, and it was just past New Year's. The movie had been showing for a few weeks at this point, so it wasn't a very busy showing, perfect for a date night with a girl like Jennifer, and she often reacted to scary movies by getting handsy and grabby holdy of me, if you know what I mean. And I'd learned some time ago that horror movies were a great way to get a bit of extra affection. Now, what can I say? We were first year college students, of course. We'd find any excuse to get our hands all over each other, and we weren't the only 2 people at the showing of Scream that night who would be making a lot of physical contact, although of course we just didn't know that yet. Now we got some popcorn, we got some soda, tickets were clipped and seats were taken, trailers were watched as they are, and Drew Barrymore got grilled on her favorite scary movie. You know the scene, everyone's seen the original Scream by now, and things started kicking off during that scene where Randy, Billy, and Stu were in the video rental store. And so if you're one of the 3 people who hasn't seen the original Scream, it's a bit meta. It deconstructs the slasher movie genre a lot, and one character in particular, Randy, he's the narrative vehicle for doing all of that. I don't remember the exact details. I was making out with my girl at the time and failing to pay too much attention to the bits where people weren't getting murdered, but a person who was a few rows ahead of ours really didn't agree with something Randy said about the rules of horror movies, so much so in fact that he yelled out his disagreement at the screen. Now you got to remember, this was back in the 90s, and back then keeping your damn mouth shut was normal etiquette in movie theaters. Outside of very specific, obviously intended moments, you didn't just yell at movies, and you certainly don't provide angry, nerdy commentary to nobody in particular because you disagreed with the writer. Well, this guy did, and we'll just call him Mitchell, although I have absolutely no idea what his name was. Of course, he started yelling and hooting about the integrity of the horror genre, and that's when the guy next to him started screaming too. Like I said, it was an empty movie theater. These 2 guys have been sitting next to each other, so I assumed they were together, but later found out that no, they were strangers who decided they absolutely had to stick to their assigned seats instead of sitting anywhere they wanted in the theater. The second guy, who I'll just call Steve, he wasn't screaming at the movie, though Steve was screaming at Mitchell for screaming at the movie. I don't remember the exact exchange, but I remember it well enough that I can make parts of it up for impact. Stuff like, dude, it's just a movie, sit the F down and shut the F up, Steve yelled. Now, I should note at this point Mitch was still sitting down. He was just kind of flailing his fists around and being very animated. Are you listening to this? Mitchell yelled back at Steve, gesturing to the screen, and then to Steve, and then to the mostly empty movie theater. Jennifer had grabbed my arm and was kind of cowering down in her seat, hoping that we wouldn't get noticed by these weirdos. I'm trying to listen to the movie, Steve said, and this seemed to calm Mitchell down for a few minutes. Then something else, and Scream set him off. God knows what it was, but I'd stopped paying attention this time, though. Mitchell really did stand up and started yelling at the screen like the characters could fully hear him and react to him. He was actually genuinely offended at some opinion that one of the characters had about horror movies. Now, don't get me wrong, he wasn't delusional. He knew that there was a writer speaking through the characters, and he knew Wes Craven had directed the movie, so a lot of his eye was directed at poor old Wes. Now rest in peace to the big man, one of the best horror directors of our time. By the way, he was still alive at the time of the story, obviously, and Mitchell was very angry at Tim for his disrespect of the horror genre. I'd never seen anyone behave so stupidly or oblivious. To this day, Mitchell was screeching about the Hypocrisy on display. I don't think it even made sense with what the movie was actually saying. He just decided that Scream was taking pot shots as beloved horror genre and nothing anyone could say or do was going to change his mind. That's what I assumed anyway, and I whispered that to Jennifer. Well, look, she whispered back. Now Mitchell was a big guy from a few rows back. Anyway, he appeared to be around 6 feet to nearly 300 pounds of fat and muscle, and then Steve stood up and squared up to him. Now Steve was not a tall, muscular powerhouse at all. He was 5 feet 6 inches, if that, and he was one of those thin, pasty dudes you see a lot of on YouTube these days, with long hair and a white t-shirts.
You know the type I mean, but good God, Steve square up to Mitchell. Like he was stone cold Steve Austin. He had the confidence of a man who knew unquestionably that he could kick this other guy's ass, and if it came to it, he would. So Steve reaches out and pokes Mitchell in the chest and says something like, "Just shut the F up and sit down, buddy. Do us all a favor, some of us are trying to watch the movie." Now me and Jennifer were paying attention. Now I grab a handful of popcorn. Jennifer whispers to me, asking to take bets on what's going to happen next, and I tell her I think Mitchell is going to back down. But I was wrong. I was very, very wrong. Instead, this Mitchell guy let out what I guess was intended to be a roar, but his voice cracked mid-growl, so it was kind of like. And then he just grabs Steve's outreach finger and with an actual audible crack, snaps his finger backwards. We're all just staring at this completely shell-shocked. Steve takes a few steps back into the aisle, and he's staring at his finger bent backwards, and then back up at Mitchell. Even in the dark of the theater, I see a look pass over Steve's face that even to this day makes my stomach sink. It was the look of a man who realized that he just made a very big mistake. You see that confident. I got this guy I'd imagined Steve has in that moment. He obviously didn't exist. I guess he thought Mitchell would have fallen for it and backed down, but not so much. Remember how I'd also assumed Mitchell was an unfit kind of slob. Who knows if I was right about that. But this guy had heft, and he threw himself at Steve, just fooling charged into him in the aisle like a goddamn bull. Slam Steve straight into the floor so hard that we actually heard another crack, and then Mitchell was pounding, punching, pummeling him. His fat fists were flying. Blood was literally coming from Steve's mouth as Mitchell was just wailing on him, continuing to shriek and yell about the movie, about horror, about disrespect, all sorts of incoherent crap that made him sound like the obvious violent nut job that he clearly was. Of course, being a hot-blooded 18-year-old male, I wasn't just going to sit there and watch this guy get destroyed just for telling Mitchell to shut up, and despite Jennifer begging me not to get involved, I started to make my way down the aisle in the semi-darkness. Now again, I was taking my time a little, hoping another savior might show up in the meantime, and thankfully she did. Out of nowhere, vaulting over chairs like some Olympian, this woman came sprinting out of left field, shocking all of us. Except Mitchell, of course, who was too busy beating on Steve to notice her. The woman, I'm just going to call her Venus, took advantage of Mitchell's obliviousness. A few feet away, I saw her stop, then she took a running kick, knocking Mitchell clear off of Steve and sending him rolling down the aisle a few feet, barely even pausing to leap over Steve. Venus then whipped something from her belt. I heard the sound of spray can, and Mitchell's screams changed dramatically. Turns out our savior was an off-duty homicide detective at the theater with her husband to enjoy a romantic date night together. Mitchell got a face full of mace, a boot's worth of broken ribs, and a handcuffing in the form of plastic ties that Venus kept on her person while off-duty, just in case situations like this arose. She later joked that she never expected to actually have to perform an off-duty arrest. Steve was fine except for a few broken teeth, and as for what happened after to Mitchell, Steve, and this Venus character, I can only guess. We missed the end of the movie, obviously, and we were all offered refunds and comp tickets for any showing or movie of our choice. Someone tells me they didn't extend this offer to Mitchell, though. Now I scored points with Jennifer for at least intending to be a hero, but I'll leave that up to you to decide how that manifested. Now this was all 30 years ago now, but I still think on it from time to time. I hope Steve, Venus, and her husband are all doing well, if they're actually still around, and Jennifer and I ultimately didn't stay together, but we are still Facebook friends, and she seems to be doing good to this day, though I've still Never watched the second half of Scream. I decided to leave the rest of the movie up to my imagination because sometimes fiction can never compete with the insanity that is reality.